I'm Stacey Homer, Head of Commercial Support at Biffa, and I'm facilitating this workshop today. In this session, we have a panel of our 3 waste experts who will be taking the next 40 minutes to change the way you think about waste. Simon Rutledge, Group External Affairs and Sustainability Manager, will be providing a legislative overview. Wright, Waste Strategy and Packaging Manager, fresh from his interview on the BBC last week, will be taking you through sustainable waste resilience. And Becky Farren, Business Development Manager. She will be discussing innovation in the circular economy. We'll be using Slido throughout the workshop, and would ask that for you all to get the very most out of this session, if we could ask that you scan the QR code on the screen now, and it's really simple to use.
Okay, Biffa's key purpose is to change the way people think about waste. My area of expertise is around legislation and policy and sustainability, as I head up sustainability. So I'll focus on the regulatory view, specifically linked to climate change. It was really good to hear Liam earlier talk about how sustainability and climate change and net zero is at the heart of the 4 strategy documents within the waste sphere. And we'll try and amplify a little bit of that as we go through. Some of you may or may not have seen this picture. It's actually a climate stripe. So this picture is made up of blue and red bands. The dark blue is the colder, and the dark red is the warmer. And these are the average, each slice is the average global temperature for a year all the way back to the year 1850, which was the start of the Industrial Revolution. And that's really when we started digging up hydrocarbons and utilizing hydrocarbons, coal and oil. And clearly that has a very strong correlation to increases in temperature. It gives a clear indication of warming of our global climate over that period. And we are seeing more extreme weather events, more hot periods. Wow, hasn't September been warm? And our bodies are probably not particularly well designed and adapted to dealing with that. Waste management accounts for approximately 4% of the UK's CO2 emissions, so that carbon dioxide that has been pushed up into the atmosphere. And because of that, there have been a variety of different international agreements, the Paris Accord, the COP in Paris, which has looked at limiting global warming by reducing carbon dioxide emissions throughout, and that's where we get all of our drive for net zero from. The UK is taking action at a more local a more local scale, setting this 25-year environment plan. And that's got 10 defined goals in it, but only 2, because we're a waste and resource management company, we're going to focus in on these 2. More sustainable and efficient resource use. So again, we were talking about buying what we need, using less, using it more efficiently, and wasting less, and minimizing waste, which is clearly key to the way we want to interact with all of our customers, including the NHS. Healthcare Technical Memorandum, difficult for me to say after lunch. 0701 is on the management and disposal of healthcare waste. I think Liam talked about it being a techie document. Well, I have a copy of that. I've had a copy of that. I'm throughout all the versions. And yeah, it's really good to see the way that's evolved to include the net zero and the focus on net zero and increased focus on probably slightly less techie and more on sustainability. But we all have a part to play, and that's very clear from that. Talking a little bit about the regulatory framework now and the policy framework. There's a raft of current policy changes, and over the next 5 years, we can see this potentially accelerating. Yes, we will have another election in next year, potentially, and certainly within the next 18 months. So that might change the flavour, but a lot of these are set in targets and regulatory frameworks already. So the first 4 of those are all about extended producer responsibility. And extended producer responsibility with regard to packaging is all about making the people who put packaging on the market responsible for the full net cost of its collection, sorting, and hopefully recycling, and if it can't be recycled, make them responsible for the disposal. Now, the NHS themselves do not have to register under this scheme, but your suppliers will, and the suppliers that Liam was talking about earlier will absolutely have to register. And they will have to bear the costs of this, which will almost certainly bleed through into us as consumers of those items. So they will be looking to redesign their packaging, hopefully. And Roger, our technologist and packaging expert, will probably talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening there. Third line down talks about recovery and fees and modulated fees. So we're talking about the potential for modulated fees. If it's more difficult to recycle, the producers will have to pay more in their EPR fees, which they will pass down to us. If it's easier to recycle, they will have to pay less. So there is a real feedback loop that's planned in for 2025-26. Another item there is mandatory single-use coffee cup take-back for the fibre-based coffee cups. I hope you've all enjoyed your coffee out there, but there's a lot of cups there. And this requirement will come in for cafes and restaurants that have more than 10 full-time equivalent employees. So they'll have to provide take-back, which will then hopefully mean that more of those are captured for recycling, which there's a very low capture rate at the moment. And it will also mean that your residual waste in your facilities might hopefully go down, because that will be pulled out into the recycling streams, both in the retailers and people will start taking them back. So that's really, really important. Collections consistency in the green. It's probably been pushed back a little bit, probably by about 12 months. But the idea behind this is the government are going to mandate in England a single set of core materials that should be collected separately. And that should hopefully really provide a simple solution for consumers, for patients, for people that come into the hospital, for their relatives, and for you and I when we're on the move, as well as staff. So all of that is really about educating people to change their behaviours and change the way they deal with waste. It should be noted that in Wales, and I know we're NHS England here, but just to share across the border experiences, it's coming in April next year, but there is a 2-year derogation for hospitals in Wales. But again, they're talking about separate collections, 4 separate collection streams of recyclables, separate food, separate textiles, and separate waste electricals. So looking further forward, the penultimate line down there, I know it's 2028. It sounds like a long way off. There was a question earlier about what is the incentive to recycle more rather than send more materials to energy from waste and recover the energy from it. Energy from waste will be brought into a carbon tax in 2028. So that carbon tax will increase the cost of energy from waste, but that will only affect the plastic and the fossil-based carbon that's being emitted. So if we can get in the next 5 years all of those plastics out, or the majority of those plastics out, and find innovative solutions, which Becky will talk a little bit about, then we can really reduce the ongoing costs and the environmental burdens that comes from dealing with the NHS's waste. Okay, my Slido question is, what legislation areas do you think need the most support on? We've only picked 3 there: extended producer responsibility, digital waste tracking, collections consistency, or you can hedge your bets and say all of them. Okay, so we've got a lot of people hedging their bets and suggesting all of them, yeah, it'll be interesting to catch up on some questions afterwards. And if we can't answer your questions here, just come and see us afterwards and collect our details, and we'll talk individually to people. So that's really quite interesting. Thank you. I'm going to close that poll now. Just a little bit about Biffa and how we're doing to get to net zero. This is we published a strategy back in 2020, and there are a series of 18 KPIs. One of the big ones there is to halve our emissions by 2030. So again, and trying to get to net zero as well. We're going to review it in 5 years' time, well, 2025 and 2030, and we will look at where the technology has got to get us further. This logo at the bottom, science-based targets, that's all about us having our targets for our emissions reductions validated by a science-based target initiative. And that's really about making sure that they align with the Paris Agreement, and they really do, they're real. They're science-based, and by doing what we've said we'll do, we should hopefully we should contribute to that limiting global warming and make sure we avoid the worst effects of climate change. And finally, just a quick call out. As the sustainability lead, it would be remiss of me not to point out that we published our sustainability report just last Thursday. And if you go to www.biffa.co.uk, you can download that in the sustainability section. And there's some real good case studies that talk about what we've been doing. I shall pass over to my packaging colleague now, Roger Wright.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Simon said, my name is Roger Wright. I'm the Waste Strategy and Packaging Manager for Biffa, which is a very long title, but I'm primarily involved with looking at packaging for our customers, but also all the other materials that we inevitably collect in our bins. And I want to pause for thought for the next 10 minutes and talk about something we call sustainable waste resilience. Now, there are going to be 9 million people with major illnesses in 2040, which I'm reliably informed is 2.5 million more people than in 2019. So that's going to have a major impact upon the NHS and our social care, of course. And we're all going to live a bit longer. I understand our life expectancy by 2040 is 83, if we're lucky enough. And it's going to have a major impact on government or private investment in our health and wellbeing services, of course. Let's also not forget, and I'm sure you're bored of hearing this, but COVID might have just been a dress rehearsal for something as bad or even worse in the future. And we're still feeling its effect now, of course. So if there's an epidemic or just an epidemic of ill health, what could we do differently with waste? What does that mean for the materials we're all dealing with every day in the hospitals in England? And at Biffa, as Simon said, Biffa, we're trying to think differently about waste. And if people think differently about waste, we think they will act differently. So I'm going to get Biffa's crystal ball out, as I say, for the next few minutes and share our thoughts on what sustainable, truly sustainable waste might look like in the next 5, 10 or even 15 years' time, before Becky brings it home with talk about the stuff that's happening here and now. So if we look at it through the lens of sustainable waste resilience, I'm going to share how we could think differently about products, about packaging, and about food waste in a hospital setting. First, I'm going to acknowledge, what qualities will make us resilient, and resilient to seismic changes, or just, as I say, more and more people coming into hospitals in the future. I'm going to look at the biggest types of waste that we deal with every day. Seems like an obvious place to start. And then finally, I want to examine what systems and solutions will make a modern hospital truly sustainable. So let's start with resilience. Now, the pandemic created a lot of extra waste, as we know, much of it plastic. And my Slido question will be how much plastic, but I won't spoil the answer now, obviously. And it changed the way we physically treated almost everything throughout that period. But fundamentally, how do we return to whatever a new normal is? Well, the answer to that is quickly, hopefully. For this and any other time, to do it quickly, we need to be dynamic, to be able to snap back to whatever new normal looks like, but maybe flexible to change again in the future. And I think of the example of the Nightingale hospitals. Waste might have to pop up and pop down just like the hospital itself does. We also have to reassess what we think is clinical waste, in our opinion. I think in 2019, in the year BC, before COVID, 10 to 15% of hazardous 10 to 15% of the waste was hazardous or infectious or could not be recycled. I have a strong suspicion it's a lot more now, unfortunately. And this brings us to this first question that I want to pose: to burn or not to burn? We're just down the road from Stratford, so I think a good quote to start that conversation. Anecdotally, a friend of mine who is a psychotherapist goes into her local hospital every day to see her patients. and they all get gowned up with their PPE and their masks and everything, and then they don't touch each other, or there's obviously no operations happening, but all that stuff goes into the clinical waste. Now, I know it's an anecdotal story, but I'm sure that's not unusual in lots of hospitals where that material is ending up probably being burnt, and we want to extract as much of that good stuff as possible. Now, busier hospitals will also mean a lot more visitors, of course. So our final thought on resilience is something we call contactless consumption. Now, I won't go through lots of examples, but I've just thought of one today. So the obvious way of reducing the amount of materials that we use in a hospital is to have contactless water fountains, and we take our own bottle to hospital to fill up our own bottles, reducing obviously the chance of infections, but also reducing the amount of plastic that we're throwing away. For us, this is also about scalable and digital innovation. And I'm not going to steal Becky's thunder on this, but this is about working smarter and not necessarily harder. So my question is, what percentage of the NHS waste was plastic? And this is in the year 2019 again, so let's see what we think about that. You're a knowledgeable bunch. Yes, it was 25%. Indeed it was, which equated to 2,500 tonnes of plastic every day. It's a staggering amount of material that is thrown away. Now, I'm not here to demonise plastic. No one should do that. It's a miracle material in the context of a hospital. So you might say, what's the big deal? What's the big deal with that? Well, there are at least, as far as we know, 15 different polymer types, many of those laminated together within a hospital setting. Some of them we don't even know what they are. So that really makes it really tricky to segregate, sort, and recycle that material. Some plastics are completely unnecessary. If I get on my soapbox about wet wipes that have got plastic in them, that's something I think we should just get rid of completely. Which leads us nicely into my second topic of waste. So I'm not going to dwell too long on this. I don't want to teach you guys to suck eggs. But there are fundamentally better ways of designing the materials that we use every day and the packaging that we're throwing away. And we'll start, of course, with PPE. Now, if we can't reuse PPE, and many reasons why we can't, can we not design it better for an upcycling purpose or a recycling purpose? And also call out the COVID testing kits, which I believe are a Frankenstein's monster of different materials, some recyclable, some not recyclable, little bits of plastic. Surely we can do that better in the future. A staple of any hospital, any ward, is the tea and coffee that everybody drinks. And I think we could potentially look at reusable, refillable solutions at scale in the hospital environment for that, and therefore reducing the amount of single-use paper cups that obviously we see at the moment. And not last, but last that I will mention is food waste. And now, I'm not going to say anything about hospital food, but there are lots of scraps and leftovers, which I'm sure we're trying to recover and recycle, but I'm sure we could do a much better job. And why is food a big deal for us? Well, food collection is food recycling. It's another type of recycling. We can extract biofuel and fertilizer from that material. So it is still recycling. Okay, so we've looked at what makes us resilient, what could make us resilient. We've looked at some of the main waste streams, but what can make us truly sustainable? Well, we can and we should remove as much material, primarily packaging, as possible from all the sort of things that we're using and seeing every day. And there will inevitably still need to be packaging, but then we can optimize everything else. No more 15 polymers. How about 3 polymers? How about clear plastic? How about plastic with less print on it? So it's got a much higher yield when we collect it and recycle it. We also, as I've mentioned, have to find new ways to introduce refill and reuse into the hospital environment. Very challenging, appreciate that, but 2 off the top of my head: reusable sharps, reusable cleaning products, things that aren't necessarily you would associate with a hospital. And then the very meaning of the word sustainable is instilling change that lasts a long time. And that involves educating the colleagues and the visitors in many respects to do the right thing and continue to do the right thing. A moment in time isn't good enough. We need to try and change behaviours in the long term to make everything more sustainable. So my last slide is really just a summary of all of that. You know, we think a resilient NHS is a smart and a circular NHS. One very quick example, and the circular economy requires us to try and not use finite materials in the future. So bio-based plastics, perhaps, that are still clinically safe, but also recyclable, not biodegradable, but still recyclable, but would divest the growth of the NHS away from finite materials. You know, we need to find systems and solutions that are fit for any future. We don't know what the future holds. And that could, for example, be the new non-mechanical or advanced recycling techniques that are developing. You might hear it called chemical recycling. So predominantly what we do is mechanically recycled materials, but there is a lot of progress in the chemical recycling of those really hard to recycle and badly contaminated materials, taking them back to plastic that can then be made into new products. That's quite exciting, but that's 5 to 10 years away. And then I suppose my final point, ultimately, much like dealing with the patients themselves, this is a balancing act of prevention and cure, not just cure. I like to think, you know, that old phrase, less is more, actually it's less, but more of the good things, more of the things that work. Now, I'm happy to take questions at the end of this, or come talk to me on the stand just outside later, but I'm going to finish there, and I want to hand over to Becky, who'll talk a little bit more about the innovation that's happening now. Thank you very much.
So I'm here to talk to you about how we already support some of our partners within the NHS, but also share some of the innovations that we have on the horizon to support you and future challenges. So in terms of what we know about healthcare, so with our 100-year heritage, we've been working with the NHS since its birth 75 years ago. So happy birthday, the NHS. So to add some context into that, in 2022 alone, we collected nearly 29,000 tonnes of waste from NHS locations across 300,000 containers. So I know it's just after lunch, so we thought we'd make that some fun facts. That actually equates to 8.31 billion face masks, nearly 10,000 ambulances, the weight of the ambulances, a lot of hospital beds, and even more Roger Wrights. Don't know if you can work out Roger's weight based on that. So, so what we've done based on our day-to-day experience of the healthcare sector is identified a few of the key issues that we know that you face on a day-to-day basis. So we understand that waste segregation is a key challenge. Hospitals were never designed with waste in mind, all the volume of people probably actually. So we understand that space is obviously an issue, and the need for internal waste movement also causes challenges in terms of space and the people that are required to move that waste. So we've been working on different solutions to make that as easy as possible, and one of which is actually a sort of colour by numbers for waste, so essentially supporting the facilities management team to segregate at the point of the internal storage for waste, so then it's easier to actually segregate at the end point of disposal where your waste is being collected. So not only does that help in terms of the segregation and also the recycling, but it also saves time from the other end in terms of having to then decant from one to the other. So in terms of reporting, I know there's been a lot of talk about reporting over the last sessions, and we understand that data capture is obviously a key element of any role within the NHS. So in terms of us, I mean, gosh, we're overwhelmed by data. Our fleet are enabled by data, and we can provide you all the data that you require. But really, it's a case of making that meaningful for you. So our carbon reporting, which is a Power BI tool, in terms of a suite that's available, it can capture anything from service levels all the way through to that carbon reporting that's really sort of driving all of our drives to carbon net zero, and being able to recognise the challenges that we're facing, but also the changes that we can make from that data. So in terms of the reliable service, we know that waste management isn't always somebody's full-time job. Sometimes it's a bolt-on. And really, in an ideal world, the collection of waste should be a silent service. So we know ourselves from first-hand experience the challenges that are presented from an unreliable service, whether that be miscollections that leads up to a build-up of waste, and then the communication challenges around chasing, all the way through to having an ability to actually flex your schedule. So if there is 1 week where you've got an extra lot of waste that you weren't expecting, it's having that ability to flex the service. So to account for that, again, talking about innovation, our self-serve portal enables you to manage waste on a day-to-day basis, whether that be being able to view waste transfer notes or adding additional collections. So all supported by our excellent customer services team, but it's that, we're all in that world now where we just go online and order what we want to. Why should waste be any different, really? In terms of training, so again, we recognise pressures, and we see it in many industries where staff turnover and language barriers can be quite an issue. So our e-learning platforms have been designed with and for the healthcare sector in mind. So in terms of the ability to go onto a very simple platform and understand not only the benefits of recycling, but also actually, what should go in what bin, which sounds easy, but obviously isn't always that straightforward, really. And then cost pressures. So we can't be in any room, whether it's at home or within a business, and not talk about cost. So we understand that cost is now more than ever high on everybody's agenda. So in terms of accounting for that at Biffa, every year we do thousands of waste audits. And within those audits, we conduct waste composition analysis, which essentially identifies improvements of how waste is being separated. So one example recently is within an NHS audit, we found that 58% of the general waste could have actually been recycled. So without changing anything on the site, and by using the existing solutions in place, the recycling rate could have been improved drastically. So in terms of the potential to reduce the amount of waste, just by coming back to the training and engagement, we can help make that difference, really. And I think that's now more than ever important with the carbon tax that Simon mentioned. It will only get more expensive to not recycle. We then talk about the hard-to-recycle waste streams, which both Roger and Simon have alluded to. So we are continually facing changes within legislation, such as the recent POPs for furniture and soft furnishings. And if you think about vapes, we've got a vape disposal box on our stand today. If you think that 5 years ago, vapes probably weren't even on our market. And now the recent stats are suggesting that 5 million vapes are being disposed of per week. So we've actually been very quick there to identify the challenge and put in a solution for a vape recycling service. So again, things happen very quickly. And again, the innovation and being adaptable to that is our highest priority, really. So they're sort of national issues as such. We also support partners. So recently we have identified an option to recycle curtains within hospitals, and also for another trust identified a circular solution for food trays, which sometimes would just go into recycling, but found a circular solution there. And again, I suppose it's just understanding, we're obviously seeing different waste streams all the time, but finding the solutions for that. And we're very lucky to be surrounded by experts within Biffa that can support there. So hopefully that gives you some examples of what we're absolutely able to do for you today. And then what I'm about to share with you are some of the innovations that are on the horizon. So not necessarily available for today, but in terms of the future development and how we will obviously support you moving forward with the challenges that we've identified. So Clean Plus is a programme that Biffa would be able to provide to FM cleaning operatives and such like to supply technology in terms of an app to be able to rate waste and recycling. So it's going back to the training and engagement, it's very much a visual aid to be able to pinpoint areas of a hospital that potentially are having more challenges than others. And then the training and engagement can come in to be able to address those issues. So we've talked about food waste and the challenges there. So Olio is available to you as consumers actually, but we're partnering with them to understand whether we can partner together to be able to share surplus food to communities in need. So again, it is an app base, but that's something that's absolutely on the horizon for the future. And I'll talk to you about our company shop. If you've been to our stand today, you'll see you'll have been exposed to company shop. But food waste is obviously a big issue across all industries, and that's something that our innovation team have got a huge focus on. Waste intensity scoring, again, any insights into be able to prevent and reduce waste is vital, and waste intensity scoring will be a key component for the future to understand the profile of waste by patient, by bed, and again, having that sort of visibility of where the waste buildup comes from. So we've talked about reporting, but I think the innovation here really is that we're working on a solution that enables you to feed directly into Eric's. So anything that we can do to make your day-to-day lives easier. And then it's just the other categories then you'd need to sort of focus on. Going back to the silent service really. Smart bins, well, I mean, we've got trials happening in different industries for smart bins, which essentially is the future of bins, to tell you exactly where the container is, how full that container is, and really, you know, I suppose it's just that visibility piece really in terms of having that insight to save more time. And let's not forget about the ongoing investigation into the hard-to-manage streams, whether that be the plastics or PPE, which is always going to be a challenge. So the project teams are continually exploring all of those. So hopefully that provides some insight into what we have in the pipeline for the future. And then just to summarise all of our points, so I think we are on the cusp of change in terms of legislation. So I think in terms of us being your partner is guiding you through that. The table we saw earlier still frightens me. So, indeed having the support behind the table really. Roger has clearly defined that sustainability is an absolute journey, and really it's reliant on changing behaviours, and that comes through the training and engagement. And ultimately that we can't stand still, whether that's us as the waste management provider or our partners, but really, we need the innovation to be able to meet the future challenges. So hopefully collectively today we've managed to sort of make you think about waste slightly differently. And then my Slido question is a very random one, but it will make sense. So would you be interested in saving up to 50% off on your weekly shop? So the reason that I ask is that in addition to innovation and sustainability, I did say it would be random. So the reason that I ask genuinely is that in addition to innovation and legislation and sustainability, reducing food waste and contributing to local communities is one of Biffa's highest priorities. We invested in Company Shop a couple of years ago now, which is essentially taking surplus products and food from all food retailers across the UK So essentially, we've got 14 supermarkets which you would walk into and see Marks and Spencer's on one shelf and Aldi on the other. And essentially, that food could have potentially been waste previously, and it's actually been delivered into company shop to go to the people who need it the most. So it's a members only, it's mean tested, and we can talk to you outside if you'd like more information. But really, it's a huge social value piece. And something that we're really proud of. So as part of that today, we're giving you the access to join company shop, which does generally save up to 50% off. And who doesn't want to get 50% off Marks and Spencer's or Waitrose products, really? That should have been another question, shouldn't it? So essentially, we'd love to talk to you today about sustainability, legislation, saving 50% off, and anything else that keeps you up at night when you talk about waste, really. So thank you.